Hi, I'm Susan Sherwin, Vice President for Development at the Aspen Institute. It's my pleasure to welcome you today on behalf of Walter Isaacson, who unfortunately could not be with us. He would, I know, want to welcome both Clive and David Walker. We are honored to have them both. I get to just say a few words about Clive, and he will then introduce David Walker. But I'd like first to thank our hosts for this series, Alma and Joe Gildenhorn. We're honored to have you both here. Alma is the trustee, and it's just a wonderful pleasure to work with her on this series, which many of you, I think, have attended previously. I'd also like to just take today to thank my colleague, Jim Spiegelman, for picking many of these wonderful books and wonderful authors during the year. We try to do a variety, and it brings out different people every time. So it's a pleasure to have you. Let me just say that Clive is a special friend of the Aspen Institute, and you all know him, of course, as a distinguished columnist for The Atlantic, previously for The Economist and for Financial Times. But he is also someone who has come frequently out to Aspen for the Ideas Festival. Is a wonderful moderator for many of our programs, and we are delighted to have him here today. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for coming. We're here to talk about a splendid new book by David Walker, Come Back, America. I'm going to say a little bit more about David and the book in a moment, but first of all, I just wanted to declare a bias in this. I mean, I will make no bones about it. I am a tremendous fan of David and have been for years. I've followed his work. I find it very difficult to disagree with much of what he says, and I gave up on that when I started reading the book. That wasn't going to happen. So some of the dissent, I think, might have to come from you. And the way we're going to organize this is that David and I will talk about the book for perhaps half an hour or so, and then we'll leave plenty of time for questions and quarrelsome interventions from the audience. So if I see you vibrating during the course of the discussion, you're thinking, why don't you ask him this? Why don't you ask him that? That will be your job in due course. I promise to give you plenty of time to do it. With that, I'll just say a word of welcome to our C-SPAN viewers who are avidly tuning into this event. Good to have them with us as well. Okay, well, David is a former Comptroller General of the United States, a former head of the Government Accountability Office, and is currently the president and the CEO of the Peterson Foundation, which has a variety of aims. One of them, one of the most important, is to lead the country back to a greater sense of fiscal responsibility. And this book, Come Back America, is about that issue. David explains in the book that the country's fiscal position is unsustainable, and he explains why, and sets out an agenda for putting the problem right. Now, I want to say right at the outset, before I get David to tell us more about this, that although this book is about fiscal sustainability, it is extremely entertaining. Don't let that subject put you off. I think one of the best things about the book is the voice. David has written this in a sort of informal and extremely engaging style, so I do seriously urge you to read the book. Well, David, to begin, we're right here on the morning after the State of the Union speech. Many of the topics in the book relate very closely to the speech. So I can't resist asking you right off the bat what you made of it.
Well, first, the president obviously is a very articulate speaker. On the economic issues, he reinforced something that I talk about in the book. There's a fundamental difference between short-term deficits and structural deficits. That the current short-term deficits largely were inherited by Barack Obama, and that we need to recognize that some level of short-term deficits are understandable because we're in a recession. We've got 2 undeclared wars. We've had a number of bailouts and other extraordinary actions, and unemployment is very high. And so he made it very clear that he wants to try to take some steps to try to get the economy growing on a consistent basis and to try to bring unemployment down. And he's going to propose a number of tax cuts or tax preferences as well as spending increases to try to do that. That may exacerbate the short-term deficit. But then he pivoted which I think is important, to talk about the structural deficit. And that's what threatens our ship of state. It's not the ice that's above the water, it's the ice that's below the water. It's not what's the debt that's on the balance sheet, it's what's off the balance sheet that represents the threat to the future. And he talked about three things. He talked about freezing a portion of discretionary spending, less than 20% of the federal budget, for 3 years. 1 year, 3 years are better than one, but frankly, it's a modest first step, especially since discretionary spending has increased 20% plus over the last 2 years. Secondly, he talked about supporting a pay-go rule, which the Senate, I think, might be voting on right now. There's lots of holes in that pay-go rule, big enough to drive a truck through. On the other hand, it does provide some constraints that otherwise wouldn't be there, and so I think it's a modest step forward. But thirdly, and most importantly, he came out for a Fiscal Future Commission to try to help set the table to make the tough choices for tougher statutory budget controls, social insurance reforms, other spending reprioritization and constraint, and tax reform that will generate more revenues. And I think that is critically important, and I think it's critically important we do it this year for recommendations after the midterm and to act before our foreign lenders lose patience.
Right. Now, the book actually makes a strong case for creating a commission.
Right.
But is the kind of commission that Obama is proposing the kind of commission you had in mind? I mean, there is an issue as to whether we need a statutory commission, the powers it will have, and so forth.
I have a strong preference for a statutory commission. And the reason of a strong preference for a statutory commission is because you get buy-in from the Congress and the President. In addition to that, only via a statutory commission can you guarantee a vote. Fact is, the Senate had a majority vote for the Conrad Gregg Statutory Commission. It got 53 votes, but under the Senate rule, you had to get 60, so it didn't pass. And while I would prefer a statutory commission, I prefer a presidential commission to nothing.
Right. Now, one of the arguments you make in the book, which I think is particularly interesting in advancing the case of the commission, is that this is the way to create a consensus in the country for action on fiscal policy. And I think the book, to my mind at any rate, regards this as the most important thing, that stepping back from the details, we have a bigger appetite for public services in this country than we have a willingness to pay the taxes that are required. How do we bridge that gap? I just wanted to press you on how much difference a commission might make to that, as it were. It's an issue of national attitudes. Can people be made to change their minds about this?
Well, first, I believe that there are two critical elements that have to be present for a commission to be successful. In addition to having capable, credible, and committed people on it and having everything on the table, there are two other things. This commission has to go outside of Washington, D.C. It has to engage representative groups of Americans with the facts, the truth, the tough choices, the prudence of acting sooner rather than later, the potential adverse consequences to our country and our families if we don't.
Right.
In addition, it needs to receive a vote on its recommendations. And only through a statutory is that guaranteed, but the President has the commitment of the Speaker and the Majority Leader that they will do everything within their power to assure that there will be a vote on the Commission's recommendations. And so I think we have to make the best of that. Look, people have a big government appetite and a small government taxation policy, all right? And you want to keep taxes as low as possible for a variety of reasons, but in the end, the math has got to work. And the truth is, and we can come back to this if you want, the far right and the far left are delusionary, and they also would get an F in math. We're not top 25 in the country. They're delusionary, and they would flunk math.
Well, let's not come back to that. Let's stay with that.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
you wouldn't let me get away with that, I'm sure.
I do get the sense myself that there is a kind of political disconnect here. The politicians understand that they need to express concern about the long-term budget. You hear that all the time. We must grapple with this problem. It's our national prosperity is at stake. But that has to mean, at the end of the day, either lower public spending or higher taxes. And voters don't want either of those things. Do you have a sense that politicians are even ready to think about grasping this nettle. I mean, I myself don't see it on either side, in either party.
Sure. Well, first, there's no party of fiscal responsibility. There are individuals who are fiscally responsible, but there's no party of fiscal responsibility. Secondly, statistically valid public opinion research that we conduct at the Peterson Foundation and that others conduct show that the number 2 issue that Americans are concerned about are escalating deficits and debt, right after the economy and jobs, way ahead of health care, way ahead of climate change, way ahead of other issues that are important issues, but way ahead. They believe that Congress and the Washington's out of touch and out of control, not making this a high enough priority, and 70% of Americans support some type of special commission along the lines.
Right.
The election in Massachusetts was not a victory for Republicans. It was a rise of independents like you and I. I've seen it coming. I've been in 46 states in the last 4 years. I think I've got a very good sense about where the American people are. They're in the sensible center. Their representatives are on the polls. That's why we not only have partisanship, we have an ideological divide which creates a stalemate. And a stalemate means you're going nowhere fast. And when things aren't going well and they're getting worse with the patches of time, that's a disaster scenario. So, I think Washington is a lag indicator. Congress is a lag indicator within Washington. And the people basically have to put the pressure for this thing to happen. And a commission has to set the table for a tough vote. Because let me tell you, taxes are going up.
Right.
And they're going up on a lot more people than those making $250,000 a year. Why? A very simple 4-letter word, math. All right? In addition, the social insurance contract is going to get renegotiated to make sure that, that when the government makes a promise, it actually can deliver on its promises. The government's got tens of trillions of promises. It doesn't know how it's going to pay for it, and it wants to make more promises. All right? We can come back to that on health care if you want. And we're going to have tough statutory budget controls because, frankly, I don't think we should send Washington one dime additional dime, without tough statutory budget controls, without round 1 of social insurance reform, round 1 of spending constraint reprioritization, and round 1 of tax reform.
Right. Well, let's just stay on health reform for a second. It is a kind of microcosm of the issue in many ways. And it kind of underlines the difficulty here. I mean, why is healthcare reform in such trouble? Well, there are many reasons why it's in such trouble, but a couple of the leading ones are somewhat self-contradictory. I mean, and they go to the heart of what you're saying. On the one hand, I think a lot of people are concerned that this reform is going to significantly increase public spending. And so they're worried about the deficit, they're worried about long-term borrowing, and they're worried about their taxes in future, all of which is valid. But the other big thing that they're worried about is cuts in Medicare. Now that's actually what we require in order to balance the budget, in order to make the existing healthcare system affordable, let alone expand it to make it better. Where is the opening for the politician? I mean, you aren't a politician, but if you were, or if you were advising a politician, how are these guys to grapple with this thing? How do you pitch fiscally responsible expansion of healthcare coverage? Your book is in favor of expanding healthcare coverage. You take a somewhat liberal line on that. Explain how you think we can make it affordable.
Well, first, I think we have to focus on 4 things on comprehensive health care reform. Number 1, cost. If there's one thing that will bankrupt America, it's out-of-control health care cost. We've already made $38 trillion more in promises for Medicare than we know how we're going to pay for. And my view is you can't reduce health care costs by expanding coverage. It's an oxymoron. In addition to that, you have to recognize that our current healthcare system, if it was a house, it's structurally unsound, it's mortgaged for more than it's worth, and it's headed for foreclosure. So you can't say that it's progress by adding a new wing built out of the same flawed materials attached to the structure that's headed for foreclosure. This is another example of how government wants to give people their dessert before we eat the spinach. We've already made tens of trillions in promises that we don't know how we're going to keep, but let's make some more, and all we got to do is pay for it. The fact is that there's 4 tests for fiscal responsible healthcare reform. You've got to pay for itself over 10, not add to deficits beyond 10, result in a significant reduction in the tens of trillions in unfunded promises we already have, and result in lower healthcare costs as a percentage of the economy after the reform than before. The bills don't pass that test.
Right.
Now, on the other hand, I do believe in some level of universal coverage. I believe that we ought to have universal coverage for what I call basic and essential. Preventative and wellness and catastrophic.
Right.
Those. I think we have to change payment systems. We need a budget. We need a cap, or we need a budget on what the federal government will spend on health care. We need to relook at tax preferences for health care. We need to relook at subsidies for Medicare, because we have subsidies for billionaires in Medicare. And there's not that many billionaires. My boss is a billionaire. Okay? He doesn't take it. All right? Because of that fact. I mean, the voluntary program.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, that sounds a little bit like tear this thing up and start all over again.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. There are 2 systems we have in this country, which I talk about in the book, healthcare more than the second, that we spend double per capita and we get below average results. Number 1 is healthcare. So it ain't about money. We spend plenty of money. And the number 2 is K through 12 education.
Right.
All right? We're not top 25 on healthcare outcomes. We're not top 25 in K through 12 education outcomes. And so it's not a matter of money. You need to re-engineer the system. Right. And I have a number of ideas about how to do that.
Okay. Okay. Well, maybe we'll come back to that if
Sure.
people want to press you on that. But there are a couple of other bases I want to touch
Sure.
before I turn it over. Under this broad heading of entitlement reform, Medicare is critical, as you say. We also have Social Security.
Right.
You have a very interesting chapter, I think, on what we should do to fix the Social Security system. Say a little bit about that.
Well, first, Social Security in the scheme of things should be easy. In a basketball analogy, it should be a layup. You can miss a layup, but the odds are pretty high you're going to hit it. On the other hand, with Medicare and healthcare reform, it's a 3-point play from underneath the opponent's basket. You know, we're going to have to dribble a little bit, take a few shots before we're going to put some points
Right.
on the board, okay? So with Social Security, look, we would have had comprehensive Social Security reform in 1999 but for the blue dress incident. And it's not just a matter of what the reform ought to be, but the process that you employ to get it.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons that George W. Bush wasn't successful with Social Security, and one of the reasons that Barack Obama is not going to be successful with comprehensive health care reform, is the process was fundamentally flawed.
Huh.
Fundamentally flawed, all right? And we saw the result of that in reaction from the public. So what we need to do is, for people that are retired or close to retirement, little to no changes, because A, it wouldn't be fair, and B, it's not politically feasible anyway. We might want to relook at the cost of living index and think about some modest change there so everybody's contributing in some way. For people that are close to the poverty level, we're probably going to want to strengthen the benefits somewhat. For people middle and upper income, somewhat less of a replacement rate. We could reform Social Security and exceed the expectation of every generations without any tax increases. But realistically, some might say, let's raise the taxable wage-based cap from about 107 to 150, all right, which is below what it would have been if we kept the same ratio that we had back when we started indexing it. And very, very importantly, in addition to having a solvent, sustainable, and secure base-defined benefit program, because after all, that's what the security means in Social Security, that we need to have a supplemental add-on automatic payroll deduction 2 to 3% savings account that goes into a real trust fund with real investments, with real fiduciary responsibility and liabilities where you go to jail if you pick the lockbox, and in a circumstance where we can have a pre-retirement death benefit and a supplemental post-retirement benefit. That is a win-win-win. All we need is leadership.
Right. And some courage, because, of course, one way of characterizing that proposal, and I don't need to tell you, you know I agree with that proposal, but one way to characterize it is partial privatization of Social Security.
Well, here's the key. The base, in my view, should remain defined benefit.
Right.
Because it is the base of retirement income security. Only 50% of Americans have a private pension plan. We have an abysmally low savings rate. It's coming up lately, at least from the standpoint of individuals, because they now know what a rainy day is. But the government is dissaving faster than individuals are saving. That's a different story. So my point is, I think that we have to keep in mind that Social Security is the foundation of retirement income security. The base ought to be defined benefit. But we should have a supplemental savings arrangement, a defined contribution element. It's an add-on, not a carve-out, because frankly,
Right.
tax preferences haven't worked. We have the lowest savings rate of any major industrialized nation. The people who save are the people who have the ability to save. They get the tax benefits. The only way you're really going to get the savings rate up is if we employ the principle that my mama taught me. Don't let people touch the money, because once they touch it, it will burn a hole in their pocket. And they will spend it more than once in America.
Right. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about your tax proposals, because that's the other big side of this. We've touched briefly on the entitlements issue, Medicare, Social Security, but as you said, it's a simple matter of maths. That's a 5-letter word, by the way, in my vocabulary. A simple matter of maths that we need to. We're going to have to raise taxes. We are going to have to raise taxes. Now, on your proposal, I mean, the book looks at this in some detail. Just give people a sense of how you think this should be done, and how it can be made politically palatable.
Well, first, I think you have to recognize that where taxes are headed without doing anything.
Right.
And what percentage of GDP are we headed to on that basis, all right? And that's above historical tax levels of 18.3% of GDP, okay? Secondly, I think you have to recognize as to what would end up happening if we didn't end up making reforms sooner or later. How high might taxes have to go in order to stop the bleeding? In the book, we talk about they would have to double between 2030 and 2040.
Right.
All right? Double. All right? I think the other thing is you have to recognize political reality. In my view, the longer we wait to try to reimpose tough statutory budget controls, reform the social insurance contract, reprioritize and constrain spending, the higher taxes are going to go for 3 reasons. 1, math, the miracle of compounding. Number 2, demographics. More people are going to be enfranchised in existing entitlement programs, and they're the toughest thing to change. And number 3, political activism. Not all segments of society are equally politically active.
Right.
All right? And so for those reasons, just for simple logic, it says we need to do something sooner rather than later. Now, taxes, I think we're going to need more revenues than historical levels. Revenues aren't necessarily taxes. All right, you can get excise, you can get user fees, you can get premiums, more means-related premiums for Medicare. There's a number of things you can do that aren't necessarily taxes because there's an exchange for it. But I think realistically taxes are going to have to go up. How you do it matters. When you do it matters. What form it takes matters. And we can go further if you want, because there are several different approaches you could take, some of which are better from a matter of economic theory than others, but others are more likely from a political feasibility standpoint than others.
Well, one of the things I particularly like in the way you discuss the issue is that you cast the defects of the present tax system as a kind of opportunity. I mean, it's so inefficient. The base is so narrow. It's so hollowed out with exemptions which are very difficult to defend in principle. That there's a lot of scope for increasing the amount of revenues we collect without raising marginal rates. Without you can have a simpler, more efficient tax system. Yeah.
Well, first, I'm a certified public accountant, and in most years, I prepare my own tax return by hand without software. Not because I'm a masochist, but because I want to be able to challenge members of Congress to do the same, because if they had to, we'd have tax reform real quick. All right? Now, tax day is not a pleasant day around the Walker household. I don't think we're alone in that, okay? And one of the things that really chaps me, that's a sophisticated Southern term, is that, I spend all this time filling out all these forms and schedules, right? And I'm in the not-for-profit sector, and I was in the public sector for 15 years, right? And just when I think I'm done, I got to fill out this AMT sheet, And I thought I was going to get all these deductions, but it turns like I don't get any of them. So I pay a 15 to 20% surtax on top of the regular tax. That is a bait and switch surtax. It is something that's got to go away. All right. I would rather have less deductions, less exemptions, less exclusions on a logical basis. Get rid of AMT and build it into rates. So at least I know when I thought I was going to get a deduction, I really get it.
Yeah.
You have to keep in mind that this country spends $3.5 trillion a year on spending, roughly, and that it foregoes revenues of about $1 trillion a year because of deductions, exemptions, exclusions, and credits. That's backdoor spending. That affects the bottom line. So just as we need to end up looking at all major spending programs, we need to look at all major tax preferences and see whether or not they're working, whether or not they're properly targeted, whether or not there should be as high priority in the future as they have been in the past. And we need to do the same thing on spending programs too, because frankly we got a lot of things that aren't working, that are wasting a lot of money, that are adding to our current fiscal problems, and are constraining our flexibility to do things that will create a better future.
One of the things I had in my mind as I was reading the book, it's something I've written about from time to time, is the this question of how far the U.S. social contract is evolving and is likely to evolve in a more European direction. Mm-hmm. I mean, one way of characterizing the Obama agenda is that there are certain aspects of the European model that Democrats want to introduce. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not accusing the administration of socialism, either overt or covert. But nonetheless, universal health care, that is something that Europe takes for granted, and it's something that the administration wants to achieve in the U.S. Now, the question is, if America chooses to move in that direction, it also has to move in the direction of European levels of taxation. Now, where in your mind, David, ought, as it were, the country to end up? I mean, is there a process of convergence here? And do we end up with European-like benefits, European-like economic security, European-like redistribution, and European taxes? Or does America want to stop short of that?
I think America will stop short of that. And one of the things that I talk about in the book is the country has strayed from the principles and values under which we were founded that made us great, and that we need to come back to those principles and values. That's the first part of Comeback America.
Right.
The second part of Comeback America is we need to make tough choices with regard to a range of sustainability challenges so we can have a comeback and our future can be better than our past. And as you talk about this issue, look, it's one thing to have a social safety net, but this country has tried to go much beyond that. It's one thing to have a sound, secure safety net. It's another thing to have middle and upper class welfare. And that's what we've done in many cases, all right? Whether it's through the tax system or whether it's through Medicare or whatever else. And so I think over time, what's going to end up happening is that we're going to have a sound and secure social safety net, but it's going to have to be much better targeted to societal needs that are affordable and sustainable over time rather than unlimited wants, which aren't, all right? And I think that Americans won't stand for European tax levels, all right? Plus, for economic growth reasons and personal choice reasons, it's not desirable there. But they're going to be higher. Our tax levels are going to be higher than they have been historically because in addition to the federal government having a major fiscal challenge, which is going to be solved primarily through spending constraint, and should be, and reprioritization, there's going to have to be more revenues. The state and local governments have big problems too. They have big problems with Medicaid, big problems with unfunded retiree health plans, underfunded pension plans, deferred maintenance on critical infrastructure, and education costs. And they have huge legacy costs that they're going to have to come to grips with. And so ultimately, we're going to have to restructure the federal government. State and local are going to have to do the same thing. And so our national fiscal challenge is greater than our federal fiscal challenge. But the federal is the biggest.
Okay. Well, let me invite some questions or comments from the audience. We have a roving microphone. Let me just say some moderators frown on comments as opposed to questions. We welcome comments. That's fine, but just keep them brief so that we can get plenty in. So we'll start with you. Can I get the mic over? And maybe you could identify yourself, say who you are.
Good day, I'm Bradley Rosenberg. I work with a small macroeconomic consulting firm. Traditionally, in our wonderful country, the only way we have gotten the type of changes that you're addressing is when our back is against the wall. I mean, if you look back to World War II, there was a huge growing consensus of what needed to be done, but until we were attacked, we couldn't move the populace. What do you see as that spark that's going to force this transition to happen before the pain is too late?
Well, first, I think it's important to note we can't wait for a crisis because it would be a crisis that would be much worse than a recession. And the other thing I talk about in the book is the 4 factors that contributed to the mortgage-related subprime crisis exist for the federal government's finances. There are 2 big differences. One, the size, scale, risk, and potential adverse consequences are much greater for a super subprime crisis, which would be a loss of confidence in the ability of the federal government to get its act together. And secondly, nobody's going to bail us out. So I think, we're making progress with the American people. Vis-a-vis those public opinion polls, vis-a-vis what's happening at the ballot box recently. We're making progress with the American people. The lag indicator is here. And, and I think that, frankly, the bubble bursting in the last 18 months served to wake Americans up, that this too big to fail concept is a fallacy. You've seen financial institutions, insurance companies, automobile manufacturers who were once viewed as being too big to fail that either failed or required a bailout. So I think the answer, last thing I would say is what's on my tie? We the people. And we the people get it, and we're starting to wake up, and hopefully we'll continue to, so that we won't wait for a crisis because we don't want to see what that crisis would look like.
I just want to press you on this because I think it's a great question. It's one I meant to ask myself. I mean, be frank. What's your prediction here? You think we can solve this problem without a crisis? I mean, if you asked me that question, I'd say on balance, no. I would say, just as the premise of the question, it takes a crisis to get these problems fixed. I'm not sure, David, even though you're a terrific spokesman for the solutions, why are you more optimistic?
Well, let me tell you what I think our greatest risk is, okay? And then we can talk about some things that may give evidence of that. I think our greatest risk is our foreign lenders lose confidence in our ability to put our financial house in order, and when the economy turns around, that we start having to pay a lot higher interest rates to finance our debt. What's important to know is that even without an increase in interest rates, the single largest line item in the federal budget within 12 years, according to the GAO, is going to be interest on the federal debt. And that's without an increase in interest rates. That's more than defense, more than Social Security, more than Medicare, more than Medicaid. And we get nothing for that. Interest rates are going up. The question is how much, how fast, once we turn the corner on the economy. And so I think that's the greatest risk. I think we could see look at least one of the credit rating agencies, maybe more than one, have downgraded the outlook for AAA status for the UK.
Right.
Look at our ratios versus theirs. We benefit from home team bias. And we benefit from the fact that we have 64% of the world's reserve currency, which gives us more rope, but not unlimited rope. Look at what the Chinese are already doing. They're diversifying into commodities. They're diversifying into corporate instruments. They're going shorter on their maturity and duration. They're pushing for more inflation-indexed treasury instruments. So there are things that are happening that are leading indicators right now. Look at how much the Fed bought of our debt last year, which to me is self-dealing. Okay, we've had self-dealing going on for a long time with the so-called trust funds, the trusted government funds. Now we have the Fed doing self-dealing. All right, you can delay market forces, you can't eliminate market forces. It's a timing difference.
Right, but we may have to get more scared than we are. I mean, that's really, I think,
you want to make people scared, but you also want to give them hope.
Yeah.
Okay, you want and what's happening right now is people are frustrated. Some are getting angry, but you want that anger to be put to a constructive purpose, rather than a destructive purpose.
Next question. Let me move further back in the room, sir. There's a microphone. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments. Just a bit of background, talking about tax reform.
Forgive me, could you just say who you are, sir?
Mark Silverman.
Okay. And you're with?
A law firm in town.
Okay. That's fine. There's no need to be embarrassed.
Appreciate it. I'll give, if anybody wants a card, I'm happy to give it to you. Talking about tax reform, as you know, President Reagan and Bradley Gebhardt got together in 1986 and flattened the rates and reduced deductions, et cetera. We see where we are right now. That has changed rather dramatically, and it always will. As a result, we've discussed through our government agencies switching systems from an income tax to a consumption tax.
Yeah, right.
That we determined you couldn't do that cold turkey.
Right.
It just too much disruption.
Right.
Professor Michael Gratz, who is now at Columbia, has written a book about doing a VAT and doing a, if you will, an incremental VAT, raise the rate as income tax rates come down. I'm sort of curious as to your views of doing a VAT consumption type system, the way to raise more revenue and integrate it slowly, bring down income tax.
Thanks.
Well, first, I believe from an intellectual standpoint that a progressive consumption tax, which gives appropriate consideration to the less well-off, is vastly preferable to our current tax system. But then you have to ask yourself, how politically feasible is it to go from what we currently have now to like a fair tax, which is what that concept is. The fair tax is you eliminate the corporate income tax, you eliminate the personal income tax, you eliminate the payroll taxes, and you go to a progressive consumption tax, all right? My view is the most likely approach that we're going to take is to streamline, simplify, broaden the base, keep the rates as low as possible, income tax, some type of a supplemental value-added tax, probably earmarked to health care. Again, must have statutory budget controls and other things before you end up would allow something like that, because there's a risk that people could just keep on raising it. And I think it is worth, I think it does have intellectual merit to consider, a phased approach to move more towards a consumption tax approach as a means to, improve efficiency, enhance compliance, and achieve a number of other objectives. So I think it's something, that should be given serious consideration.
In my business, they call that varying the lead. You want a VAT as well as the existing income tax. That's what you're calling.
I think realistically, that's where we're headed.
That's what we're going to have.
I think that's where we're headed. Okay, and let me understand this about taxes. The wealthy bear a large burden for taxes, especially income taxes. But here's one of the concerns that I have that a lot of people don't think about. Today, over 40% of Americans don't pay any income taxes, and some get rebates through earned income tax credit. That's headed to 50% plus under the current advocated policies of the administration. Now, what does that mean? Well, they do pay payroll taxes, but the payroll taxes aren't adequate to fund those programs. And those programs provide greater relative benefits for the less well-off, all right? Income taxes fund all or substantially all of all the constitutional roles of the federal government: national defense, homeland security, federal judicial system, foreign policy, Congress, executive office of the president, all right? So 40 to 50% of Americans get a free ride on the constitutional role of the federal government. I got a problem with that. I think that creates a very big disconnect that could have serious adverse consequences over time. And so I think we need dramatic reform, but we're going to have to do it in installments. This country doesn't do dramatic reform all at once. All right? I mean, we have too many checks and balances in our system to get that done. It's not just the 60 votes in the Senate, okay? But, I mean, that's one of them.
But any kind of national VAT, even if it came in at 1 percentage point, that would be a dramatic reform right there, wouldn't it?
We're going to get it.
We're gonna
I
get it.
believe we're going to get it, but we're not going to get it. We're not going to get it standing alone. It's going to have to be part of a quote-unquote grand bargain,
Yep.
which would include tough statutory budget controls, round one of social insurance reform, round one of spending reprioritization constraint, and round one of tax reform.
So you can imagine this coming out of a budget commission.
Yeah.
This is the kind of thing that would...
Yeah.
Next question, sir. Okay, you're next. Sorry.
Charles Clarkson, I'm an entrepreneur. Following up on the Pearl Harbor thing, we passed the draft by one vote a few weeks before Pearl Harbor. What's your thought about budget? If ever there was an argument about the Fiscal Commission being subject to budget reconciliation and only needing 51 votes, can that happen? Could it happen?
The Fiscal Commission or health care reform?
Well, either one,
I
but
think-
I'm more focused on the Fiscal Commission.
You raise an interesting point. I think you could end up doing the Fiscal Commission as part of budget reform with a straight face. And that's a very interesting concept because it would be, the purpose of it would be to provide more fiscal discipline, all right? On the other hand, if you tried to do health care reform via the budget reconciliation process, I think that would be a tactical nuclear weapon.
No, the Commission.
No, that's a very intriguing idea. I knew you were a bright guy, Buck.
But what about a bit of both? I mean, some people urge I mean, it seems very unlikely now to happen, but some people have been urging the House to pass the Senate bill and at the same time a so-called reconciliation sidecar that with budget tweaks that could go back to the Senate for a majority vote.
Yeah, I think we need to explore all options. I mean,
Okay.
but I think, the key is that if you're going to use budget reconciliation, it's supposed to be to try to make our fiscal situation
about fiscal
better.
discipline, that's
It's
the
about
idea.
fiscal
Yeah.
discipline, fiscal responsibility, and remember the Harry and Louise ads? We're headed for a Thelma and Louise ending. Okay, and so we need to make sure that we, change course.
That's good. We're over here now. Please, please.
Thank you. I'm sorry I'm not identifying myself because it's not all about me. It's all about you, David Walker. Thank you very much for coming here today.
No, thank you.
I was just wondering if you could
She's not
comment
related,
on...
just so you want to know.
Yes, the air of
related.
mystery is irresistible.
I was wondering if you could let us know, I have two quick questions. Do you feel that tort reform deserves what you call a relook? And also, since we're chiefly bound by the decisions of our elected leaders, and you're unfortunately not one of them, I wish you were, could you give us an idea of who you could be willing to support as a Horizon leader?
See, I didn't even dare to
first,
ask that.
yeah, so you want an endorsement. Okay, first.
No, I just love your advice.
No. Okay, well, first, he's a little seasoned. He's a great guy, but he's a little seasoned. In any event.
Well, tell him you said that.
No, he is a case study of the American dream come true and a model statesman. There's no question about that. But my point, the answer to your question is, first, tort reform. Yes, we need tort reform, but we need something more fundamental. One of the things I talk about is we need alternative courts for health care, I believe, like we have for bankruptcy. In addition to that, we need national evidence-based practice standards that would help physicians decide how to allocate, but they would make the decision how to allocate limited resources under a federal budget, but would also serve as a safe harbor against malpractice claims, which the biggest cost of malpractice is not awards, it's defensive medicine. And so we need to recognize that reality. On the second, I mentioned in the book about a dozen people on both sides of the aisle who I believe are sincere and are trying to championing putting our fiscal house in order. Page 32. And I'll leave it at that.
Have any of them embarrassed you yet, or you still stand by this list?
Well, I think, let's just say this. You have to understand that members wear two hats. They wear a hat with regard to their committee assignments, and in some cases they can be leadership, and they wear a hat to represent their state. Basically, what happens is that their macro hat is their committee hat or their leadership hat, And for that, on the fiscal standpoint, they should be helping to assure that the pie is reasonable and responsible from a fiscal standpoint.
Right.
However, with regard to their state, they want as much of that pie as they can get. And so that's how sometimes you can look at this and look like it's, well, there's a dichotomy here or a contradiction. You know, they wear two hats.
Right.
You know, and they have jobs to do.
Okay. We're still over here. Please.
I'm Alma Gildenhorn, a trustee. If, in your opinion, neither is the party of fiscal responsibility, who would you suggest would be on this statutory budget commission?
Yeah.
Or do I just look on page 32?
Well,
I mean,
first,
David, you yourself would volunteer for
well, we'll see. But here's the key. My view is, ideally, the commission should be comprised of three kinds of people. Elected officials from both sides of the aisle and both ends of Capitol Hill. Secondly, administration representatives, probably a couple. And thirdly, several capable, credible people who are not government officials, who would bear a disproportionate share of the burden to state the facts and speak the truth to the American people outside the Beltway, because quite frankly, if you have a hard R or hard D on your sleeve, or if you're a current elected or administration official, a very large percentage of the population will discount you, no matter what you have to say, all right? I think as far as the individuals that are appointed, whichever one of those three, places they come from, they should be capable, credible, and committed to trying to come up with a package of reforms that can achieve broad agreement and that achieves certain specific objectives from a fiscal standpoint. For example, stabilizing debt to GDP, not just over 10 years, but over time. Achieving a express reduction in the amount of unfunded obligations that we have. I mean, some specific quantifiable things. And frankly, I think it's okay to allow amendments to the proposals as long as they are bottom line neutral. In other words, if you don't want to restructure benefits as much, or you don't want to raise taxes as much, then you got to pay for it, such that on the bottom line, it's neutral. Because in the end, we've got to get our bottom line in shape, and we've got to get debt to GDP at a level that we can sustain over time.
Just on a point of information, this is something we touched on earlier, but I found out I'd love it if you could clarify it for me. A commission created by executive order, which it looks as though is what we'll get because the Senate's just voted down the attempt to create a statutory commission. Could a commission created by executive order have that property you just mentioned, that it would bind the Congress in certain ways, that would be an expedited legislative process? Or is that something that Congress itself would separately have to bind itself to? See what I'm saying?
It was something that would have to separately bind themselves to. Right now, what President Obama has done is he secured a commitment from Speaker Pelosi and Majority Leader Reid that they would do everything within their power to help ensure that a commission's recommendations would get a vote. That's easier for Speaker Pelosi to make that commitment because the Speaker controls what goes to the House floor. Right. And therefore, it's easier for her to do that. It's more difficult for Leader Reid to do that because he doesn't control 60 votes.
Right.
All right? Now, Buck mentioned an interesting concept of reconciliation. And is there a way to do something through reconciliation? Whether it's the commission or to guarantee that it gets a vote. You got to keep in mind, to guarantee that something's going to get a vote, you got to be comfortable with the composition of the commission. And you got to be comfortable with what's on the table. And so it's hard to imagine that the Congress would end up guaranteeing a vote unless they directly were involved in deciding who was on the commission and what it was going to consider. My concern is that people may try to politic this. And I think it would be a huge mistake for the Republicans to try to politic this. And I think it would be a huge mistake for elected members to cave to the fringes on the right and the fringes on the left. By the way, we had some profiles in cowardness this past week of sponsors of the bill didn't vote for it. All right? We ought to ask a few questions about that. All right? That was caving to the extremes, and that's what's wrong. All right? The country is in the sensible center. That's where the solutions are.
Okay, another question. I'm just trying to get a sense of where I ought to go next. So, how are you? Thanks.
Stefan Richter with the Globalist magazine. David, all these issues are mega complex in any industrial society. The United States probably is the most complex of these societies. Other countries made a pact 100 years ago to introduce a parliamentary democracy so that something called the finance ministry is in charge of sorting these things out. Because what you say about we the people is absolutely correct, but we the people are very busy. It's over our pay grade would be the next phrase. Washington has never died because there are not enough good ideas. But even this conversation among two of the bright people on this issue focuses very much on people and process. In the end, it comes all to decision making. Do you ever wonder whether, with all these commissions we've had 20 years, 25 years, and some of them have worked a little bit and so on, at the end of the day, whether we even have the right constitutional setup to make any decisions in America? And I know it's a heretic question, but need I remind you that the French these days have the same union structure as the United States, and they reinvented several republics. So at the end of the day, is that
Hopefully
something you worry about or fear about?
The book goes there. The book.
I touch on that.
Does not flinch from this issue.
There is a chapter called "Dysfunctional Democracy," and in that chapter, it talks about what's wrong with our current system, the fact that we have a republic that is not representative of the public, the fact that the real challenge that we have today is not the partisanship, it's the ideological divide. It does talk about the need for redistricting, campaign finance, reform, term limits, among other things, some of which would require constitutional amendments. I don't raise the specter of going to a parliamentary system. You know, I think there are things that can be done incrementally that are short of that to try to make the current system work better. But I wouldn't eliminate the possibility a number of years from now, but I wouldn't put it on the table now, and I don't in the book.
Okay. I'm tempted to, no, but I won't ask about it. Please.
You have some experience with that system.
You know, you mustn't let me divert the conversation.
Hi, Susan Levine, Capitol Keys, and I had a question about the voting process because I know Washington was done on a deal thanks to Alexander Hamilton, our location, so that's nothing new, but I have trouble with $300, $500, $600 million for votes.
The American people do too.
So I'm curious what...
Especially when it's their money.
Right. Yeah. So I'm curious how, since voting is a part of all of that's political in this town, what do you say about that? And how does that affect our budget?
Yeah, well, first, I definitely think that we need more transparency in a number of areas, especially in connection with earmarks, as an example. I think one of the reasons that Americans were really outraged recently was because of the special deals that were done on health care for Nebraska and Louisiana, and frankly, the special deal that was done for the unions. All right? I mean, I think they were outraged by that, okay? And so, you know, one of the things I do talk about in the book is some areas that we need more reforms and additional transparency, if you will. But it's got to be meaningful transparency. Like right now, we've got something up on the web that you can see every contract that the government issues. But it's like a file dump. It's like what you give the IRS. You know, you can't make anything out of it, okay? I mean, you know, it's got to, I mean, you can have information overload, okay, such that you don't really have meaningful transparency. We need meaningful and timely transparency so it can make a difference. And I think we need to employ name and shame a lot more. Now, part of the problem with that is it's hard to shame people nowadays. You ever notice that? I mean, you know, the bar has gotten so low. People got to do the limbo to get under the thing, you know?
Yeah, it's true. So, we get the microphone over here, and then you next. Thanks.
Apropos of name and shame, Wall Street and the banks. And my real direct question is, do you think the president's notion of a tax on the big banks is simply a politically populist fig leaf, or not?
Well, it's clearly populist. It clearly doesn't go to the source of the problem, I think. You know, my view is that for any system to work, a banking system, a compensation system, a healthcare system, a tax system, whatever, you got to have three things. Properly aligned and integrated incentives that encourage people to do the right thing. Adequate transparency, that's nature and timeliness, in order to provide reasonable assurance they will, because a variety of parties are looking. And thirdly, appropriate accountability if people do the wrong things. We were 0 for 3. That's called a strikeout. By the way, we were 0 for 3. We're 0 for 3 for healthcare, too. And we're 0 for 3 with regard to a number of other areas that I talk about in the book where we're dysfunctional and we need transformational reform. You know, I'd rather go direct than indirect. That's an indirect way to deal with something rather than a direct way. I always think that direct's better. Yeah.
Okay. Please.
Thank you. My name's Amy Baker. I'm here with an organization called LIFT. We train hundreds of college students to provide services to low-income people. Part of it is personal budgeting on the micro level. I'm also here as a young person who's a future bearer of a lot of this weight. What is my role in all of this, and what can I do to organize some of my age cohort here?
Well, a couple things. First, young people should be very, very, very involved in this debate, because they will pay the price and they will bear the burden disproportionately if others fail to act. There are three things that are happening that affect young people. Their futures are being mortgaged. Relative investments in their futures, because of mandatory spending growing, which constrains discretionary like basic research, critical infrastructure, are being squeezed at a time where we will face increasing competition in a global economy. In the South, we call that a triple whammy. That's not good, all right? Now, the sad thing is that young people have not been as engaged in this. The other thing I think that's going on right now is that we have massive taxation without representation going on right now. You know, there's two kinds of taxes, current taxes and deferred taxes. And large deficits, absent structural reform, represent deferred deficits, deferred taxes with interest. And it's easy to it's easy to spend somebody else's money. It's even easier to spend their money when they're too young to vote or not born yet. And to a great extent, that's what's going on. So young people need to become informed. They need to become involved. They need to make sure that they're part of the solution. They need to encourage action sooner rather than later. And as an individual, they better plan, save, invest, and preserve their savings for retirement, especially if they want to retire at a reasonably early age, because they're going to need it. Government's going to do less. Government has overpromised and underdelivered. It's going to have to target its efforts more, and it's going to have to get more revenues. That's a reality. It's going to primarily do spending constraint, but it's going to get more revenues too.
Okay. We have another question. Sir, at the back.
Honor to Borgraf, CSIS. Excluding the $2 trillion wars that you mentioned, we are still spending more on defense than the rest of the world put together. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about defense in the context of your book.
Well, there's a chapter dedicated to defense. And let me just give a few stats. The percentage of the federal budget dedicated to defense is about 20%. It was 43% in 40 years ago. It was 1969. It was about 43%. But you are correct in saying that we spend about as much as the rest of the world combined on defense. Now, there's a couple of footnotes on that, all right, or at least 3 footnotes. One, the dollar doesn't go as far here as it does elsewhere. Labor cost, material cost, and things, especially in China, it goes a lot further. Secondly, we're a lot more transparent about what we spend on defense than certain other countries are. And thirdly, we are bearing a disproportionate share of the burden for global security. We're doing too much, others aren't doing enough, all right? There's a lot of waste in defense, including how we go about planning and executing our weapon systems development, budget strategy. There's also a lot of waste through our acquisition and contracting practices. And in addition to that, I question the sustainability of the all-volunteer model, force model, and I get into that. It is very, very, very expensive, much more expensive than, frankly, even members of Congress knew.
Interesting. So, yes, you, and then you. So, thanks.
My name is Steve Hayes. You mentioned earlier that there is no fiscally responsible political party, and I think the evidence is overwhelming that that's the case. My question is, do you think that we could get one, either one of the major parties or a third party?
Well, there's always hope, let's just say that I've been very disappointed in both parties, and I think that the only way that something's going to change is if, the people force the change. I don't want to say that one of the current major parties could do that because that's showing favoritism, and I don't want to do that. I think that if they don't, then I'm picking. I'm a political independent. Let me reinforce that, okay? I think if they don't, I think there is a chance of forming something else going forward. But I think right now, independents have a tremendous amount of influence, and I think the other thing you have to keep in mind is, depending upon which poll you go by or survey you go by, a plurality of Americans are now independents, and it's going up. Now, part of the problem with that is in the House of Representatives, there's only about 60 competitive seats, absent some major national referendum issue, which means that the independents really don't play a major force except in those 60 seats, which means that the Democrats tend to be more liberal than the country, the Republicans more conservative, because everything's decided in the primary. And that's where you get the ideological divide, the stalemate, and that's why we need redistricting reform.
Right. So.
Tom Donlan from Barron's Magazine. Yesterday, Treasury Secretary Geithner and former Treasury Secretary Paulson both said that it was necessary to bail out AIG at that moment in 2008 in order to avert a Great Depression and 25% unemployment, respectively.
Right.
My question is, first question is, do you believe that yourself? My second question is, assuming for the sake of argument that it's true, would not a Great Depression be one of the signal results of putting our house in order? And if that's true, would you say that it's better to do it now than to do it in 25 years?
Well, first, I don't know what their basis of Great Depression and 25% unemployment was. I'd love to see their modeling, to be able to do that. I know that. It's out of the left side of the keister, okay? That's another sophisticated Southern term. But the fact of the matter is, you can't prove a negative, all right? Were there good reasons to do it? I'm sure there were. I wasn't there, okay? The question is, what are we doing? What are we doing to try to make sure it doesn't happen again? And when we did we do it the right way, all right? And I think we obviously had failures in the private sector and in government that caused these conditions to exist. And then when the crisis occurred, we didn't have clearly defined clearly defined objectives, criteria, and conditions, and so we waste a lot of money. We set some bad precedents. We need to learn from that, okay? I would not want a Great Depression, and I do not recommend one in my book, okay? At the same point in time, I will tell you that if we don't start addressing our structural imbalance, we may well get a Great Depression. Because and I think it's important that we recognize that a super subprime crisis, which would be what would happen if there was a loss of confidence in the federal government's ability to put its own financial house in order, a flight from the dollar, a dramatic increase in interest rates, all right? That would be a global depression. We don't want that. We don't have to have it. And the key is, what do we need to do to avoid it? And that's what the book is about, solutions. And solutions not just from the standpoint of policy, operational, and political, but the kind of processes it will take to make those solutions a reality. Because one of the things I learned a long time ago, including in transforming GAO, it's not just what you want to do, but how you have to go about it to get it done. You have to have solid proposals and processes that have integrity, because if you don't, you will fail, because you'll have to fight a two-front war. And it's very hard to win a two-front war.
I couldn't ask for a better summing up. We've come to the end of our time. That's a splendid note on which to end. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for asking such good questions. Really interesting.
Dave, good to see you.